Queen Lydia Blackstone had ruled the Crimson Moon Pack for 7 years with an iron fist and an unwavering belief that strength was the only currency that mattered in their world. At 29, she was the youngest Alpha Queen in the Pack's 300-year history, and she'd earned her position through decisive victories in both political maneuvering and physical combat, which was why finding herself in her current predicament was not just inconvenient, it was humiliating. "Your Majesty," Dr. Elena Vasquez said carefully, her clipboard clutched in hands that betrayed only the slightest tremor, "the test results are conclusive. You're entering an unprecedented heat cycle." Lydia's golden eyes flashed with the dangerous fire that had intimidated council members and enemy alphas alike. "That's impossible. Alpha queens don't experience heat cycles. We never have." "According to historical records, no," Dr. Vasquez agreed, her voice steady despite the palpable waves of frustrated energy radiating from her sovereign. "But Your Majesty, your hormone levels and pheromone signatures are undeniable. This is happening." Lydia stood abruptly from the examination table, her movements sharp with barely controlled agitation. For the past 3 days, she'd been experiencing symptoms that made no sense. Elevated body temperature, hypersensitive skin, and an almost overwhelming restlessness that made it impossible to focus on state affairs. "How long?" Lydia demanded, pacing the medical facility's private room like a caged predator. "Based on the progression, I estimate you have perhaps 6 hours before the cycle reaches its peak intensity," Dr. Vasquez replied. "Your Majesty, I must recommend immediate isolation protocols. A queen in heat could destabilize the entire pack dynamic." Lydia's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Isolation. Perfect. The strongest alpha in the territory reduced to hiding in her chambers like some helpless Omega." The words came out harsher than she'd intended, carrying the weight of years of conditioning that equated any vulnerability with weakness. In Lydia's world, alphas led and omegas followed. Alphas made decisions and omegas provided support. The idea that she might experience something traditionally associated with omega biology felt like a fundamental challenge to everything she'd built her identity around. "There is another option," Dr. Vasquez said hesitantly, "which is suppression therapy. We could use pharmaceutical intervention to block the heat cycle entirely." Lydia considered this option, weighing the appeal of maintaining her normal state against the unknown risks of interfering with whatever biological process was occurring. "Side effects?" she asked pragmatically. "Unknown," Dr. Vasquez admitted. "Your Majesty, what's happening to you is unprecedented. We have no data on the long-term effects of suppressing a queen's heat cycle because we've never had to address one before." Before Lydia could respond, the medical facility's emergency alarm began sounding. Both women immediately tensed, recognizing the specific pattern that indicated a breach in pack territory. "Your Majesty," came Marcus Webb's urgent voice through the intercom system. Marcus had served as Lydia's head of security for 3 years and had never once sounded genuinely panicked. "We have a situation at the northern border. Unknown Omega has crossed into pack lands. She appears to be injured and she's displaying unusual energy signatures." Lydia felt her protective instincts flare, temporarily overriding her personal crisis. "Unusual how?" "She's unconscious, but her presence is affecting our border guards. They're reporting feeling calmer, more focused. It's like nothing we've encountered before." Dr. Vasquez and Lydia exchanged glances. In their world, Omega presence typically had a soothing effect on alphas, but the level Marcus was describing suggested something far beyond normal pack dynamics. "Bring her to the medical facility," Lydia ordered, her queen's authority taking precedence over her personal discomfort. "Full protective protocols, but treat her as a guest, not a prisoner." "Your Majesty," Dr. Vasquez said carefully, "given your current condition, proximity to an unknown Omega could be complicated." Lydia turned to face the doctor, her expression set with the determination that had carried her through countless challenges. "Dr. Vasquez, I've been queen of this pack for 7 years. I've faced territorial invasions, political conspiracies, and natural disasters. I'm not about to let biological inconvenience prevent me from ensuring the safety of someone who sought sanctuary in our territory." "Of course, Your Majesty. But perhaps we should prepare isolation chambers." "No isolation," Lydia said firmly. "I want to assess this Omega personally. If she's injured, she deserves our immediate attention, not bureaucratic delays. 20 minutes later, Lydia stood in the medical facility's main treatment room, fighting to maintain her composure as waves of heat and hypersensitivity washed over her. The pharmaceutical suppressants Dr. Vasquez had administered were helping, but the Queen's heat cycle was proving remarkably resistant to chemical intervention. The unknown Omega was wheeled in on a medical gurney, and Lydia's first sight of her sent an unexpected jolt through her system. The woman was small and delicate, with auburn hair that caught the fluorescent lighting like flame and skin that seemed to glow with an inner radiance despite her obvious exhaustion. But it was the scent that nearly brought Lydia to her knees. Wildflowers and rain-washed earth, with something underneath that called to every instinct Lydia possessed. Her wolf, usually a controlled force of leadership and protection, suddenly yearned toward the unconscious Omega with desperate intensity. "Your Majesty." Dr. Vasquez's voice seemed to come from very far away. Lydia forced herself to focus, though every fiber of her being wanted to move closer to the mysterious stranger. "Her condition? Exhaustion, dehydration, and what appears to be psychic shock," Dr. Vasquez reported, checking the Omega's vital signs. "But she's stable. What's unusual is her energy signature. It's unlike anything I've seen before." As if summoned by their conversation, the Omega's eyes fluttered open. They were the color of deep forest moss, and when they focused on Lydia, both women felt something electric pass between them. "Where?" the Omega began, her voice soft but carrying undertones that made Lydia's skin tingle with awareness. "You're safe," Lydia said, moving closer despite every rational thought warning her to maintain distance. "You're in Crimson Moon territory. I'm Queen Lydia. What's your name?" The Omega struggled to sit up, her movements graceful despite her obvious weakness. Riley Chen. I was running from..." She stopped abruptly, her moss-green eyes widening as she seemed to truly see Lydia for the first time. "You're in heat," she said, with surprising directness. Lydia stiffened, her defensive instincts flaring. "That's none of your concern." "Actually," Riley said, her voice gaining strength, "it might be. Your Majesty, what you're experiencing isn't a traditional heat cycle." "And how would you know that?" Lydia demanded, though something in Riley's tone suggested knowledge rather than presumption. Riley slowly pushed herself up to sitting, her movements careful but determined. "Because I'm the Omega who's been having dreams about you for the past 6 months. And because when I look at you, I can see a bond mark trying to manifest on your shoulder." Lydia's hand immediately went to her left shoulder, where she'd been experiencing a strange tingling sensation for days. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Riley asked gently. "Your Majesty, true mate bonds don't follow conventional rules. They don't respect pack hierarchies or social expectations. They simply exist." The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. True mate bonds were rare, occurring perhaps once in a generation, and they traditionally formed between compatible alphas and omegas who complemented each other's strengths. "I don't have a mate," Lydia said firmly, though even as she spoke the words, she could feel their falsehood resonating in her bones. "You do now," Riley said softly, extending her hand toward Lydia. "And if you'll let me help, I can show you that being vulnerable doesn't make you weak. It makes you complete." Chapter 2. Resistance and Recognition. "Get your mark off me, Omega," Lydia snarled, backing away from Riley's outstretched hand as panic and fury warred in her chest. The very idea that some unknown Omega could waltz into her territory and claim a bond with the Queen was not just presumptuous, it was revolutionary in a way that threatened everything Lydia understood about her world. Riley's hand dropped to her side, but her expression remained calm and understanding rather than hurt or offended. "Your Majesty, I can't remove something that was already there. I can only help you recognize it." "There's nothing to recognize," Lydia snapped, though her body was betraying her words with every passing second. The heat cycle that had been building for days was reaching a crescendo, and Riley's presence seemed to be both intensifying and somehow soothing the symptoms simultaneously. Dr. Vasquez cleared her throat diplomatically. "Your Majesty, perhaps we should run some tests." "No tests," Lydia interrupted. "I want this Omega out of my territory immediately." "I can't leave," Riley said quietly, struggling to her feet despite Dr. Vasquez's protests. "Your Majesty, I didn't choose to come here. I was compelled. For the past week, I've been unable to eat, sleep, or think about anything except getting to this territory. Every instinct I possess was driving me toward you. Lydia studied Riley's face, looking for signs of deception or manipulation. Instead, she saw exhaustion, confusion, and something that looked remarkably like the same desperate compulsion that had been driving Lydia's own restlessness. "That proves nothing," Lydia said, though her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Doesn't it?" Riley asked, taking a careful step closer. "Your Majesty, when did your heat cycle begin?" 3 days ago, Lydia admitted reluctantly. "I started traveling toward your territory 4 days ago," Riley said. "I left my pack, my job, my entire life because something inside me said I had to get here. Does that sound like coincidence to you?" Dr. Vasquez was taking notes frantically, her scientific mind clearly fascinated by the implications of what they were witnessing. "Your Majesty, if Miss Chen is correct about the timing, it suggests a synchronized biological response that's consistent with true mate bonding." Lydia felt trapped between her rational mind, which insisted this was impossible, and her body, which was responding to Riley's proximity with an intensity that went far beyond normal Omega-Alpha attraction. "Even if that were true," Lydia said, fighting to maintain her composure, "I can't have a mate. Queens rule alone. It's how our pack has maintained stability for 3 centuries. Maybe," Riley said gently, "it's time to consider that there might be a better way." The suggestion hit Lydia like a challenge to everything she'd been taught about leadership and strength. In her world, alphas who showed vulnerability were seen as weak. Queens who shared power were viewed as indecisive. The idea that she might not only have a mate, but an Omega mate who could somehow enhance rather than diminish her authority was beyond revolutionary. It was heretical. "You don't understand," Lydia said, her voice carrying the weight of years of conditioning. "I've fought for 7 years to prove that a female alpha can rule as effectively as any male. I've faced challenges to my authority from pack members who thought I was too young, too emotional, too willing to consider different perspectives. If I suddenly appear with a mate, especially an Omega mate, it will be seen as proof that I was never strong enough to lead alone." Riley's expression softened with understanding. "Your Majesty, what if the opposite were true? What if having a mate made you a better leader rather than a weaker one?" "How?" Lydia demanded. "Because," Riley said, taking another step closer, "true mates don't compete with each other. They complement each other. Your strength doesn't diminish mine, and my abilities don't threaten yours. Together, we become something neither of us could be alone." Despite herself, Lydia found herself drawn to Riley's words. There was something about the Omega's presence that made the constant tension Lydia carried seem less overwhelming, the endless weight of royal responsibility less crushing. "What abilities?" Lydia asked, her curiosity overriding her defensive instincts. Riley smiled, and the expression transformed her entire face from merely pretty to genuinely radiant. "I'm what's called a harmony Omega. It's rare. Maybe 1 in 10,000 Omegas develops the ability to sense and balance pack dynamics, to identify sources of conflict before they become destructive, to help alphas make decisions that benefit everyone rather than just the strongest." Lydia felt her breath catch. The problems that had been plaguing her pack for months, increasing tensions between older and younger members, disputes over resource allocation, conflicts between traditional and progressive approaches to pack governance, suddenly seemed less insurmountable. "You can sense pack dynamics?" Lydia asked. "I can feel the emotional currents that run through groups," Riley confirmed. "Right now, for instance, I can sense that your pack is deeply loyal to you, but they're concerned about your isolation. They want to support you, but they don't know how to approach someone who seems to handle everything alone." The observation was uncomfortably accurate. Lydia had indeed been struggling with increasing isolation as her responsibilities grew heavier and her willingness to show vulnerability decreased. "That doesn't mean we're mates," Lydia said, though her resistance was weakening. "No," Riley agreed, "but this might." She rolled up her sleeve, revealing an intricate silver pattern that covered most of her forearm. The design was beautiful, flowing lines that looked like wind patterns intertwined with geometric shapes that suggested strength and stability. "It appeared 3 days ago," Riley said softly, "the same day your heat cycle began." Lydia stared at the mark, then slowly rolled up her own sleeve. On her forearm was an identical pattern, but rendered in gold rather than silver. The designs were perfect mirrors of each other, complementary rather than identical. "How is this possible?" Lydia whispered. True mate bonds manifest when two people are ready to become more together than they could ever be apart, Riley said, her voice gentle but certain. Your Majesty, you've spent 7 years proving you can lead alone. Maybe now it's time to discover what you can accomplish with someone who's designed to support and enhance your strengths. Lydia studied the matching marks, feeling something shift inside her chest. The heat cycle that had been torturing her for days suddenly felt less like a biological malfunction and more like her body's way of preparing for a connection she'd never allowed herself to imagine. This doesn't change anything, Lydia said, though even she could hear the lack of conviction in her voice. I'm still queen. I still have responsibilities that come before personal desires. Of course, Riley agreed. But, Your Majesty, what if fulfilling those responsibilities became easier instead of harder? What if having a true mate made you a more effective leader rather than a compromised one? Before Lydia could respond, Marcus's voice came through the intercom again, this time carrying urgent concern. Your Majesty, we have a situation. The Pack Elders are requesting an emergency council meeting. There are rumors about your condition, and some members are questioning your fitness to lead during what they're calling a time of vulnerability. Lydia felt familiar anger flare. Anger at the assumption that any show of biological reality somehow undermined her competence. Anger at Pack members who would use her heat cycle as an excuse to challenge her authority. But before she could respond with her usual sharp authority, she felt Riley's hand touch her arm gently. Immediately the anger didn't disappear, but it transformed into something more focused, more strategic. Your Majesty, Riley said quietly, this could be an opportunity instead of a crisis. Let me help you show them that a queen with a true mate isn't weakened. She's evolved. Lydia looked at this remarkable Omega who had appeared in her territory at the exact moment when everything in her life was changing, offering partnership instead of submission, enhancement instead of dependency. For the first time in her adult life, Queen Lydia Blackstone considered the possibility that strength might come not from standing alone, but from having the courage to trust someone else with her heart. One chance, Lydia said finally. But Riley, if this undermines my authority or weakens my pack's stability, the bond ends immediately. Riley smiled, and Lydia felt her world shift on its axis. Your Majesty, I'm going to help you become the strongest queen in your pack's history. Together. Chapter 3. Facing the Council. 2 hours later, Lydia stood outside the Grand Council chamber, her heat cycle temporarily managed through a combination of pharmaceutical suppressants and Riley's surprisingly effective calming presence. The Omega stood beside her, no longer wearing the simple clothes she'd arrived in but a formal dress that Lydia's personal staff had somehow procured that perfectly complemented the Queen's own ceremonial attire. Remember, Riley said quietly, her hand briefly touching Lydia's arm in a gesture that sent steadying warmth through the Queen's system. They're not just questioning your fitness to lead, they're afraid of change, and fear makes people reactive rather than rational. Lydia nodded, though every instinct she possessed was screaming at her to face the council alone as she always had. Bringing Riley into what was certain to be a challenging political situation felt like admitting weakness, even though the Omega's presence had already proven remarkably stabilizing. Your Majesty, Marcus appeared at her side, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture tense with concern. The council is assembled, I should warn you. Elder Morrison has been particularly vocal about the need for immediate action to preserve pack stability. Lydia's jaw tightened. Elder Morrison had been one of her most persistent critics since she'd taken the throne, constantly questioning decisions that deviated from traditional pack governance. If he was leading the charge for this emergency session, it meant he saw her heat cycle as an opportunity to undermine her authority permanently. How many are with him? Lydia asked. 3 of the 7 elders, plus several younger alphas who've been pushing for more aggressive territorial expansion, Marcus replied. But Your Majesty, you still have strong support from Elder Thorn, Elder Reyes, and most of the pack's middle leadership. Riley had been listening to this exchange with the focused attention that Lydia was beginning to recognize as one of her remarkable abilities. Your Majesty, may I offer a tactical observation? Lydia looked at her, noting how naturally Riley had positioned herself as an advisor rather than a subordinate. Go ahead. Elder Morrison isn't really concerned about your heat cycle, Riley said, her voice carrying the certainty of someone who could read emotional undercurrents like others read facial expressions. He's concerned about your progressive policies, the infrastructure improvements for lower-ranking PAC members, the education initiatives, the diplomatic outreach to neighboring territories. He sees those as threats to traditional hierarchy. How can you possibly know that? Lydia asked, though she suspected Riley was correct. Because I can feel his emotional signature from here, Riley replied calmly. Anger, yes, but underneath it is fear of losing influence and status. He's using your biological condition as an excuse to challenge policies he's opposed for months. Marcus looked between the Queen and her potential mate with growing respect. That's remarkably insightful and accurate, based on conversations I've overheard. Lydia felt pieces clicking into place. If Riley was right, this confrontation wasn't really about her heat cycle at all. It was about the direction she'd been taking the PAC, and Elder Morrison's resistance to changes that empowered PAC members beyond the traditional alpha elite. So how do we handle it? Lydia asked, including Riley in the strategic planning in a way that felt both natural and revolutionary. We turn his attack into an opportunity to demonstrate exactly why your leadership style works, Riley said, with growing confidence. Your Majesty, you've been ruling effectively for 7 years while maintaining PAC stability and improving quality of life for everyone. The fact that you're now experiencing a biological condition that affects billions of beings throughout history doesn't change your track record. And the mate bond? Lydia asked, testing Riley's strategic thinking. We present it as an enhancement rather than a complication, Riley replied immediately. A true mate bond doesn't weaken a leader. It provides additional resources, perspectives, and capabilities that benefit the entire PAC. Marcus was nodding slowly. It's a bold approach, but it could work, especially if Miss Chen can demonstrate her abilities in real time. Lydia looked at Riley, seeing determination and intelligence that matched her own. Are you ready for this? Because once we walk through those doors together, there's no going back. You'll be identified as my potential mate in front of the most powerful alphas in the territory. Your Majesty, Riley said with a smile that was both gentle and fierce. I've been ready for this my entire life. I just didn't know it until I met you. The council chamber fell silent as Lydia entered with Riley at her side. The massive room, with its stone walls and ancient tapestries depicting PAC history, had intimidated many visitors over the centuries, but Riley moved with quiet confidence, her presence somehow making the imposing space feel more welcoming rather than threatening. Your Majesty, Elder Morrison said, rising from his seat with the formal courtesy that barely masked his hostility. Thank you for joining us during what must be a difficult time. Elder Morrison, Lydia replied evenly, taking her place at the head of the council table with Riley standing slightly behind and to her right. I understand you have concerns about recent events. Indeed we do, Morrison said, his sharp eyes moving between Lydia and Riley with calculating assessment. Your Majesty, the PAC has learned that you're experiencing an unprecedented biological condition. Some are questioning whether this affects your ability to make clear-headed decisions about PAC welfare. Lydia felt her temperature spike with anger, but Riley's subtle touch on her shoulder provided immediate grounding. Through that contact, she could sense Riley reading the emotional currents in the room. Morrison's calculated aggression, the uncertainty of the moderate elders, the protective loyalty of her supporters. Elder Morrison, Lydia said with dangerous calm, are you suggesting that biological functions somehow diminish intellectual capacity? I'm suggesting, Morrison replied carefully, that unprecedented conditions require unprecedented consideration of leadership fitness. I see, Lydia said, her voice carrying the authority that had earned respect throughout the territory. And during the territorial dispute with the Silver Ridge PAC 3 years ago, when Alpha Jackson suffered a hunting injury that left him dependent on PAC healers for 2 months, did we question his fitness to lead? Morrison's expression tightened. That was different. Alpha Jackson's condition was temporary and well understood. As is mine, Lydia replied smoothly. But since you've raised concerns about my decision-making capacity, perhaps you'd like to present a specific policy or action you believe demonstrates impaired judgment. The challenge hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown. Morrison had been expecting to attack Lydia's biological condition. Instead, she was forcing him to critique her actual performance as queen. Your recent infrastructure spending has been aggressive, Morrison said, clearly scrambling for solid ground. Resources that could strengthen our military capabilities are being diverted to housing improvements and educational programs. Riley stepped forward slightly, not enough to challenge protocol, but enough to indicate her engagement with the discussion. Elder Morrison, if I may ask, what has been the result of those infrastructure investments on pack morale and productivity? Morrison's eyes flashed with irritation at being questioned by an Omega, but before he could respond, Elder Thorne spoke up. Actually, Elder Thorne said thoughtfully, pack satisfaction surveys show the highest levels of loyalty and engagement in our recorded history. Productivity is up 18%, and we've had 0 defections to other territories. Furthermore, Elder Reyes added, the education initiatives have identified and developed talents in pack members who were previously underutilized. Our technical capabilities and diplomatic reach have expanded significantly. Riley nodded respectfully to both elders. So the Queen's policies have strengthened the pack both internally and externally? That's correct, Elder Thorne confirmed. Lydia watched this exchange with growing admiration for Riley's tactical intelligence. The Omega wasn't challenging Elder Morrison directly. She was letting Morrison's own colleagues present evidence that undermined his position. Elder Morrison, Lydia said, do you have specific concerns about recent decisions, or are you questioning my leadership based solely on biological circumstances, beyond my control? Morrison was clearly realizing that his attack was backfiring. Your Majesty, the pack simply needs assurance that this condition won't affect your judgment going forward. Then let me provide that assurance, Lydia said, standing with regal authority. Elders, for 7 years I have led this pack through territorial disputes, natural disasters, economic challenges, and political changes. My track record speaks for itself. She gestured to Riley. What's new is that I now have access to additional counsel from someone whose abilities complement my own. Riley Chen is a Harmony Omega, with the rare gift of reading pack emotional dynamics and identifying potential conflicts before they become destructive. With respect, Your Majesty, Morrison said with barely veiled disdain, Omega Council has never been part of our governance structure. Riley stepped forward with calm dignity. Elder Morrison, with your permission, I'd like to demonstrate what Omega Council can offer. Before Morrison could object, Riley continued, right now I can sense that you're concerned about more than just the Queen's heat cycle. You're worried about your grandson Kevin's struggle to find his place in the pack hierarchy, and you're frustrated that traditional advancement paths don't seem to suit his particular strengths. Morrison's face went pale. Kevin's difficulties were a closely guarded family secret. You're also concerned about the growing influence of neighboring territories and whether our diplomatic approach leaves us vulnerable to aggression, Riley continued. These are valid concerns that deserve thoughtful attention rather than being used as weapons in political attacks. The room was completely silent. Riley had just demonstrated intimate knowledge of pack dynamics that would have taken years for a traditional advisor to develop. How? Elder Morrison asked, his hostility replaced by genuine bewilderment. Because I can feel the emotional currents that flow through this room, Riley explained gently. Your concerns, Elder Morrison, aren't attacks on the Queen. They're expressions of love for your family and your pack. That's exactly the kind of perspective that can help Her Majesty make decisions that address real needs rather than surface symptoms. Lydia felt something shift in the chamber's atmosphere. Riley wasn't just defending their bond. She was demonstrating how that bond could benefit everyone present. The question before this council, Lydia said, isn't whether my biological condition affects my leadership. The question is whether you're willing to embrace the additional capabilities that TrueMate bonds can bring to our pack's governance. Chapter 4. The Bond Strengthens. After the council session ended with a unanimous vote of confidence, even Elder Morrison had grudgingly agreed that Riley's insights were valuable, Lydia and Riley found themselves alone in the Queen's private study. The adrenaline from the political confrontation was fading, leaving Lydia acutely aware of the heat cycle that suppressants could only partially control. That was remarkable, Lydia said, settling into her favorite armchair while Riley examined the extensive library that lined the study's walls. The way you read Morrison's concerns turned potential enemies into allies. I've never seen anything like it. It's not manipulation, Riley said, pulling a book about pack governance from the shelf and settling into the chair across from Lydia. It's just understanding that most conflict comes from unaddressed needs rather than genuine malice. Lydia studied Riley's profile in the lamplight. noting how naturally the Omega had made herself at home in what had always been Lydia's private sanctuary. The sight should have triggered territorial instincts, but instead it felt right. "Tell me about this Harmony Omega ability," Lydia said, genuinely curious about the woman who had so dramatically entered her life. "Is it something you've always had?" Riley's expression grew thoughtful. "It started developing when I was 15, but I didn't understand what it was at first. I just knew I could sense when people were upset or angry, even when they were trying to hide it. My original pack thought I was just unusually empathetic." "What changed?" Lydia asked. "I started predicting conflicts before they happened," Riley replied. "I could feel when tensions between pack members were building toward confrontation, sometimes days in advance. At first, people appreciated the early warnings, but then they started seeing you as a threat to their privacy," Lydia guessed, understanding how pack politics could turn gifts into liabilities. "Exactly. Pack leaders didn't want someone who could sense their emotional states during negotiations or private discussions. Other pack members felt exposed, like they couldn't have private thoughts around me." Riley's voice carried old pain, and Lydia felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. "So you left." "I've been traveling for 2 years, trying to find a place where my abilities were seen as helpful rather than invasive," Riley said. "Until last week, when every instinct I possessed started driving me toward your territory." "The mate bond," Lydia said, though she was still struggling to fully accept the concept. "The mate bond," Riley confirmed. "Your Majesty, I know this is overwhelming. True mate bonds don't follow normal courtship patterns or social expectations. They simply exist." Lydia stood and moved to the window that looked out over her territory, the land she'd protected and governed for 7 years. In the distance, she could see pack members going about their evening routines, confident in the security she provided. "Riley," Lydia said slowly, "I need you to understand something about my position. Queens don't get to make personal choices based on emotion or desire. Every decision I make affects thousands of people." "I understand," Riley said, moving to stand beside Lydia at the window. "But, Your Majesty, what if personal fulfillment and effective leadership weren't mutually exclusive? What if having a true mate made you a better queen rather than a compromised one?" Lydia felt the warmth of Riley's presence, the way her heat cycle symptoms seemed to ease when the Omega was near. "Prove it." "What?" "Prove that this bond makes me stronger," Lydia said, turning to face Riley directly. "Show me how an Omega mate enhances rather than diminishes an Alpha Queen's capabilities." Riley studied Lydia's face, clearly recognizing this as both challenge and invitation. "Your Majesty, may I touch your mark?" Lydia hesitated, then rolled up her sleeve to expose the golden pattern that had appeared 3 days earlier. When Riley's fingers traced the design, both women gasped as energy flowed between them. Suddenly, Lydia could sense things she'd never perceived before: the emotional states of every pack member within a mile radius, the subtle tensions and harmonies that ran through her territory, like underground rivers. But more than that, she could feel Riley's mind complementing her own, strategic thinking enhanced by emotional intelligence, leadership instincts balanced by empathetic understanding. "This is what we become together," Riley said softly, her hand still on Lydia's mark. "Your strength and my perception, your authority and my insight. We don't lose ourselves. We become more than we could ever be apart." Lydia felt tears gathering in her eyes as she experienced for the first time what true partnership might feel like. Not subordination or dependence, but genuine complementarity. "The heat cycle," Lydia said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "It wasn't a malfunction. It was my body preparing for this connection. Alpha Queens have never experienced heat cycles before because Alpha Queens have never found their true mates before," Riley said with gentle certainty. "You're not broken, Your Majesty. You're evolving." Before Lydia could respond, Marcus's voice came through the intercom with urgent concern. "Your Majesty, we have a situation. Scouts report armed vehicles approaching our northern border. At least 20 fighters, well-equipped and organized." Lydia immediately shifted into command mode, but instead of the familiar isolation of leadership responsibility, she felt Riley's presence supporting and enhancing her tactical thinking. "Riley," Lydia said, "can you sense their emotional signatures from this distance?" Riley closed her eyes, extending her abilities through their bond. "Anger, determination, and fear. They're not invaders, Your Majesty. They're refugees. Someone's been hunting them. Lydia felt her protective instincts flare. Marcus, change our response protocols. Defensive positions, but be prepared to offer sanctuary rather than repel invasion. Your Majesty? Marcus sounded surprised by the deviation from standard territorial defense procedures. Trust me, Lydia said, her hand finding Riley's as their bond marks glowed with shared purpose. And Marcus? Prepare medical facilities and temporary housing. We may be about to welcome new pack members. As they moved together toward what would likely be a long night of crisis management, Lydia realized that for the first time since becoming queen, she wasn't facing challenges alone. Riley's presence didn't diminish her authority. It amplified her capability to lead with both strength and compassion. The Omega's mark hadn't weakened the Alpha Queen. It had completed her. Ready? Riley asked as they headed toward the command center. With you beside me, Lydia replied. I'm ready for anything. For the first time in her life, Queen Lydia Blackstone understood that true strength came not from standing alone, but from having the courage to trust someone else with her heart and her crown. Chapter 7. Deeper Connections. 3 weeks after the refugee crisis had been successfully resolved, Lydia stood in her private chambers, watching Riley through the bathroom doorway as her mate prepared for their first official state dinner together. The 23 refugees they'd welcomed had not only integrated seamlessly into pack life, but had brought valuable skills that strengthened their community. More importantly, the way Lydia and Riley had handled the crisis together had earned them respect throughout the territory and beyond. You're staring, Riley said with amusement, catching Lydia's eyes in the mirror as she applied subtle makeup that enhanced her natural radiance. I'm appreciating, Lydia corrected, moving to stand behind Riley and placing her hands on the Omega's shoulders. 3 weeks ago, I thought having a mate would complicate my life. Now I can't imagine governing without you. Riley leaned back against Lydia's warmth, their bond marks glowing softly in response to the contact. Any regrets about that rather dramatic first declaration? Lydia winced, remembering her panicked demand to get your mark off me. I think I was reacting to fear rather than reality. Fear that needing someone would make me weak. And now? Riley asked, turning in Lydia's arms. Now I understand that the strongest people are those who have the courage to trust others with their vulnerabilities, Lydia replied, brushing a strand of auburn hair from Riley's face. Riley, what we've built together in these past weeks, it's changed how I see everything. It was true, Riley's presence had transformed not just Lydia's personal life, but her approach to leadership. The Omega's ability to sense emotional undercurrents had prevented 3 potential conflicts, identified 2 pack members struggling with personal crises who needed support, and helped Lydia make decisions that addressed root causes rather than surface symptoms. Your Majesty, Marcus's voice came through the intercom, your guests are arriving for dinner. Tonight's dinner was significant. Representatives from 4 neighboring territories, including some who had been skeptical of Lydia's progressive policies. It would be Riley's first formal appearance as Queen's Consort, a title they'd created specifically to honor the unique nature of their partnership. Ready to show the world what a mated queen looks like? Lydia asked, offering Riley her arm. Ready to show them what effective leadership looks like, Riley corrected with a smile that made Lydia's heart skip a beat. The state dining room had been transformed for the occasion, with elegant table settings and floral arrangements that created an atmosphere of warmth and sophistication. As Lydia and Riley entered together, Lydia felt a surge of pride watching the assembled dignitaries rise in respect. Alpha Victoria Stoneheart, Lydia said, greeting the first guest with formal courtesy. Victoria ruled the neighboring Mountain Ridge territory and had been one of Lydia's most vocal critics during her early years as queen. Your Majesty, Victoria replied, her sharp eyes taking in every detail of Lydia and Riley's presentation. And this must be the famous Queen's Consort we've heard so much about. Riley Chen, Riley said, extending her hand with the confidence that Lydia had come to admire. It's an honor to meet you, Alpha Victoria. Victoria shook Riley's hand, and Lydia watched with fascination as the Alpha's expression shifted from polite skepticism to genuine interest. Through their bond, Lydia could feel Riley reading Victoria's emotional state and responding with exactly the right combination of respect and warmth. Fascinating, Victoria murmured, clearly sensing something unusual about Riley's presence. I've heard rumors about your unique abilities, Miss Chen. I prefer to think of them as enhanced emotional intelligence, Riley replied diplomatically, the ability to sense and address underlying concerns before they become conflicts. As the evening progressed, Lydia watched Riley work the room with skills that complemented, rather than competed with her own. Where Lydia commanded respect through authority and strategic thinking, Riley earned trust through empathy and genuine understanding of others' perspectives. "Your Majesty," Alpha Marcus Ironwood said during the main course, "I have to admit I was skeptical when I heard about your partnership arrangement, but watching you two work together tonight, I'm beginning to understand the advantages." "What advantages do you see?" Lydia asked, genuinely curious about an outsider's perspective. "Perspective," Marcus replied thoughtfully. "Traditional alpha leadership can sometimes miss emotional undercurrents that affect pack stability. Having someone who can sense and address those dynamics, it's like having early warning systems for problems most of us don't see coming." Riley smiled at the assessment. "That's exactly right, Alpha Marcus. For instance, right now, I can sense that you're concerned about succession planning in your own territory. Your daughter is ready for more responsibility, but you're not sure how to transition authority without undermining your own position." Marcus nearly choked on his wine. "How could you possibly know that?" "Because it's a common concern among strong leaders who want to ensure continuity," Riley said gently, "and because the emotional signature of that particular worry is quite distinctive." Could you offer advice on managing such transitions?" Marcus asked hesitantly. Lydia watched with growing admiration as Riley launched into a thoughtful discussion of leadership succession that drew input from several other guests. Her mate wasn't just reading emotional states. She was facilitating productive conversations that addressed real concerns. "Your Majesty," Alpha Victoria said quietly, leaning closer to Lydia, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" Lydia asked. "For assuming that taking a mate would compromise your effectiveness as a leader," Victoria replied. "What I'm seeing tonight is quite the opposite. Your Queen's consort doesn't diminish your authority. She amplifies your ability to address complex challenges." Lydia felt a warm glow of vindication. "Thank you, Alpha Victoria. That means a great deal coming from you." "I'm wondering," Victoria continued, "whether you'd be willing to share your insights about this partnership model. Several territories are dealing with leadership challenges that might benefit from similar approaches." Before Lydia could respond, Riley appeared at her side with perfect timing. "Alpha Victoria, I couldn't help but sense your interest in collaborative leadership models. Perhaps we could arrange for more detailed discussions about implementation strategies." "I would be very interested in that," Victoria replied immediately. As the evening wound down, and guests began departing with invitations to future collaboration, Lydia and Riley found themselves alone in the dining room, surrounded by the elegant remnants of their successful diplomatic gathering. "That was extraordinary," Lydia said, pulling Riley into her arms. "You turned potential critics into allies, addressed concerns I didn't even know existed, and made everyone feel heard and valued." "We did that," Riley corrected. "Your authority gave me the platform to use my abilities effectively. Without your strength and position, my insights would be meaningless." Lydia studied Riley's face in the candlelight, marveling at how much her understanding of partnership had evolved. 3 weeks ago, I thought needing someone was weakness. Now I realize that the courage to be vulnerable with the right person is the strongest thing I've ever done. And 3 weeks ago, I thought my abilities made me too different to belong anywhere," Riley replied. "Now I understand that being different isn't a liability. It's exactly what you needed to become the leader you were meant to be." As they moved toward their shared chambers, both women understood that their bond had evolved beyond personal connection into something that was transforming how leadership itself could function. "Riley," Lydia said as they prepared for bed, "I love you. Not just as my mate, but as my partner in everything that matters." "I love you too," Riley replied, her hand finding Lydia's as their bond marks pulsed with warm light. "And Lydia, we're just getting started." Chapter 8. The Ultimate Test. 2 months later, Lydia woke to the urgent sound of emergency alarms echoing throughout the compound. Beside her, Riley was already sitting up, her enhanced senses picking up emotional distress from across the territory. "What is it?" Lydia asked, though she was already reaching for her clothes and communication device. "Fear," Riley said, her voice tight with concern. "Massive amounts of fear coming from the eastern border, and anger. Controlled, military-grade anger." Marcus's voice crackled through the emergency channel before Lydia could respond. Your Majesty, we have a code red situation. Armed force of approximately 100 fighters, approaching from multiple directions. They're flying the banner of the Coalition. Lydia felt ice form in her stomach. The Coalition was a rogue organization that had been systematically attacking progressive packs throughout the region, claiming that innovations like diplomatic cooperation and expanded pack member rights were corrupting traditional shifter culture. How long do we have? Lydia asked, moving into full command mode. 30 minutes, maybe less, Marcus replied. Your Majesty, this isn't a territorial dispute. Intelligence suggests they're specifically targeting you and the Queen's consort. Riley was already dressed and moving toward their emergency protocols cabinet. They see our partnership as a symbol of everything they oppose, she said grimly. A mated queen who shares power with an Omega threatens their entire worldview. Lydia felt fury and protectiveness surge through their bond as she realized that Riley was in danger specifically because of their relationship. Options, Marcus? Fight or evacuate, Marcus replied immediately. We have strong defenses, but they outnumber us 2-1. Evacuation isn't an option, Lydia said firmly. This is our territory, our home. We don't abandon our pack members. Your Majesty, Riley said quietly, there's a third option. Lydia turned to look at her mate, seeing something determined and slightly dangerous in Riley's moss-green eyes. Which is? We use our bond, Riley said simply. Not just for emotional support or enhanced decision-making, but for actual combat enhancement. Lydia stared at Riley. Combat enhancement? True mate bonds don't just connect minds and emotions, Riley explained, moving to help Lydia with her tactical gear. In moments of extreme need, they can temporarily share physical capabilities. Your strength and speed, combined with my ability to read opponents' emotional states and predict their actions. That's theoretical at best, Lydia said, though her tactical mind was already considering the implications. Everything about our bond has been theoretical until we needed it, Riley pointed out. Lydia, I'm not asking you to make me a fighter. I'm offering to make you an unbeatable one. Before Lydia could respond, the compound's outer defenses activated, filling the air with the sounds of energy weapons and coordinated pack defensive maneuvers. Decision time, Your Majesty. Marcus's voice came through the comm, strained with combat stress. Lydia looked at Riley, brilliant, brave Riley, who had transformed her understanding of leadership and was now offering to risk everything to protect their pack. Do it, Lydia said, extending her hand toward Riley's. Whatever happens, we face it together. When their hands clasped and their bond marks blazed with silver and gold light, Lydia felt power flood through her system that went far beyond normal alpha enhancement. She could sense every opponent within a mile radius, predict their movements before they made them, and move with speed and precision that seemed impossible. But more than that, she could feel Riley's mind complementing her own. Tactical thinking enhanced by emotional intelligence, combat instincts balanced by strategic wisdom. Ready? Riley asked, though she looked more like a warrior queen than a gentle Omega. Let's show them what a truly bonded pair can do, Lydia replied. The battle that followed became legend in pack histories throughout the region. Lydia and Riley moved as a single organism with devastating effectiveness, each anticipating the other's actions while using their combined abilities to outmaneuver opponents who had expected to face a traditional alpha and her vulnerable Omega mate. Riley's ability to read emotional states allowed her to predict enemy tactics, while Lydia's enhanced strength and speed, amplified through their bond, made her nearly unstoppable in combat. Together, they didn't just fight the Coalition forces, they inspired their own pack members to fight with courage and coordination that turned the tide completely. When the battle ended with Coalition forces in full retreat, Lydia and Riley stood together in the compound's main courtyard, surrounded by cheering pack members and the debris of their successful defense. To Your Majesty, Elder Morrison said, approaching with an expression of awe and respect that would have been unthinkable months earlier. What we witnessed today, that wasn't just combat. That was evolution. Evolution? Lydia asked, though she suspected she knew what he meant. The bond between you and the Queen's consort, Morrison continued, it's created something new, a form of leadership that's stronger than anything our ancestors imagined possible. Riley smiled, her hand finding Lydia's as their bond marks continued to glow with residual energy. Elder Morrison, We haven't created something new. We've simply discovered what was always possible when people have the courage to trust each other completely. As pack members began the process of healing and rebuilding, Lydia and Riley found themselves alone for a moment in the courtyard where they'd stood together against impossible odds. "No regrets?" Lydia asked, their familiar question taking on new meaning after what they'd just experienced. "Only that it took a battle to show everyone what we've known for months," Riley replied. "That true partnership doesn't weaken leaders. It creates capabilities that neither could achieve alone." Lydia pulled Riley closer, marveling at how the Omega who had stumbled into her territory 3 months ago had become not just her mate, but her equal partner in everything that mattered. "I love you," Lydia said simply. "Not because you complete me, but because you enhance everything I already was." "I love you too," Riley replied. "And Lydia, after today, I think the world is going to understand that the future of pack leadership isn't about alphas ruling alone. It's about true partners ruling together." As their bond marks pulsed with warm light under the setting sun, both women understood that they had done more than defend their territory. They had proven that the courage to be vulnerable with the right person created strength that could literally change the world. The Omega's mark hadn't weakened the Alpha Queen. It had evolved her into something the world had never seen before and would never forget. Chapter 9. The New Paradigm. 6 months after the coalition battle, Lydia stood before an assembly of over 50 pack leaders from across the continent, her hand resting gently on Riley's shoulder as they addressed what had become known as the Continental Leadership Summit. The great hall in the neutral territory of Summit Ridge buzzed with energy as alphas, betas, and for the first time in recorded history, several omegas sat together as equals in a formal governance gathering. "Distinguished leaders," Lydia began, her voice carrying the authority that had made her legendary. "6 months ago, many of you questioned whether a mated queen could lead effectively. Today, I stand before you not to defend that choice, but to share what we've learned about the evolution of leadership itself." In the audience, Alpha Victoria Stoneheart nodded approvingly. She had become one of their strongest supporters after witnessing the diplomatic and military effectiveness of Lydia and Riley's partnership firsthand. "The old model," Riley continued seamlessly, her voice carrying the confidence that had grown from months of successful collaboration, assumed that leadership required isolation, that vulnerability was weakness, that different perspectives were threats to authority. "We've discovered," Lydia said, their synchronized speaking style having become their trademark, "that the opposite is true. The strongest leaders are those who have the courage to trust others with their vulnerabilities, who see different perspectives as resources rather than threats." Alpha Derek Wolfhart from the Northern Territories raised his hand. "Your Majesties, while your success is undeniable, how do we know this model can work for other territories? Your bond is unique." "An excellent question," Riley replied, gesturing to several couples in the audience. "Alpha Derek, I'd like you to meet Alpha Sarah Chen and her mate, Omega Marcus Rivera, from the Desert Wind Pack. They've been implementing collaborative leadership for 3 months now." Sarah Chen stood, her presence commanding immediate attention. "Alpha Derek, when I first heard about Queen Lydia and Queen's consort Riley's model, I was skeptical. But after witnessing their effectiveness, my mate and I decided to experiment with shared governance. The results," Marcus added, his voice carrying quiet authority, "have exceeded our most optimistic projections. Pack satisfaction is at historic highs. Territorial disputes have been resolved through diplomacy rather than force, and our resource management has improved dramatically." "How many territories are now using collaborative leadership models?" asked Alpha Maria Santos from the Eastern Coastal region. Lydia smiled. 17 packs have adopted full partnership governance, with 12 more in transition phases. But more importantly, we're seeing the emergence of new leadership structures that don't follow traditional Alpha-Omega pairings. "For example," Riley added, "the Sunrise Valley Pack is now led by a triumvirate of an Alpha, a Beta, and an Omega, each contributing their unique strengths to collective decision-making. The Mountain Ridge Territory has implemented council-based governance, where decisions are made by consensus among multiple perspectives." Elder Morrison, who had traveled with Lydia's delegation, stood to address the assembly. 6 months ago, I opposed Queen Lydia's partnership with Queen's consort Riley. I believed it threatened our traditional values and pack stability. A murmur of interest rippled through the crowd, as Morrison's initial resistance was well known. "Today," Morrison continued, "I stand before you to say that what I thought was a threat to tradition was actually its evolution. The Crimson Moon Pack under collaborative leadership is stronger, more stable, and more prosperous than it has been in my 50 years of service." "What specific changes have you observed?" asked Alpha Jonathan Blake from the Mountain Territories. "Decision-making is more thorough," Morrison replied immediately. "Problems are identified and addressed before they become crises. Pack members feel heard and valued rather than simply managed, and our conflict resolution has transformed from reactive punishment to proactive support." Riley stepped forward. "Leaders, what we're really discussing isn't just governance structures. It's the fundamental question of whether strength comes from dominance or from cooperation. The coalition forces that attacked our territory," Lydia added, "represented the old paradigm. They believed that innovation threatened traditional strength, that different perspectives weakened rather than enhanced capability. And yet," Alpha Victoria observed, "they were defeated by exactly the innovation they opposed. Because," Riley said with quiet intensity, "cooperation isn't weakness disguised as strength. Its strength evolved beyond the need for domination." The discussions continued for 3 days, with territories sharing experiences, challenges, and successes with various collaborative leadership models. By the end of the summit, 23 additional packs had committed to implementing partnership governance structures. But perhaps more significantly, the summit had established the Continental Leadership Council, a permanent body dedicated to supporting innovative governance approaches and facilitating cooperation between territories. "Your Majesties," Alpha Derek said during the closing ceremonies, "when this summit was first proposed, many of us came expecting to hear about an interesting experiment. Instead, we've witnessed the documentation of a fundamental shift in how leadership itself functions." "Not just witnessed," Alpha Sarah Chen corrected, "participated in. We're all part of this evolution now." As the summit concluded and leaders departed to implement changes in their own territories, Lydia and Riley found themselves alone on the terrace of their temporary quarters, watching the sunset paint the mountains in brilliant colors. "Any regrets?" Lydia asked, their familiar question now carrying the weight of everything they'd accomplished together. "Only that we can't see into the future to watch how this transformation unfolds over generations," Riley replied, leaning against Lydia's side with perfect contentment. "I think," Lydia said, her arms encircling Riley's waist, "we're going to have the privilege of living that transformation rather than just watching it." "What do you mean?" Riley asked, though she suspected she already knew. "I mean that what we've started here isn't just about pack governance," Lydia said with growing excitement. "It's about proving that every assumption about strength, leadership, and partnership can be evolved, and we get to spend our lives discovering what that evolution looks like." Riley turned in Lydia's arms, her moss-green eyes bright with love and determination. "Together. Always together," Lydia confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted like hope and felt like the beginning of everything. Chapter 10. Legacy of Love. 1 year later, Lydia stood in the nursery of their expanded private quarters, gently rocking their newborn daughter, while Riley worked at the desk nearby, reviewing reports from the 43 territories now implementing collaborative leadership models. "She has your eyes," Riley said softly, looking up from her correspondence to watch Lydia with their child. "And your determination," Lydia replied, marveling at how their 6-week-old daughter, Aria, seemed to study everything around her with intense focus. "I think she's going to be a force of nature." "Good," Riley said with satisfaction. "The world she's growing up in is going to need strong leaders who understand that power shared is power multiplied." It had been an extraordinary year of growth and change. The Continental Leadership Council had facilitated peaceful resolution of 12 territorial disputes, established interpack educational exchange programs, and created support networks for leaders implementing innovative governance structures. More personally, Lydia and Riley's bond had continued to evolve in ways that surprised them both. Their ability to share physical capabilities during the coalition battle had developed into a permanent enhancement of both their individual strengths and their collaborative effectiveness. "The Australian delegation arrives next week," Riley said, returning to her reports. "They're interested in establishing a Southern Hemisphere Leadership Council based on our model." "And the European territories?" Lydia asked, settling into the rocking chair with Arya. 3 confederations have formally requested consultation on implementing partnership governance, Riley replied. Riley, we're not just transforming the continent anymore. We're influencing leadership evolution globally. Lydia looked down at their daughter, imagining the world Arya would inherit. A world where collaborative leadership was normal rather than revolutionary, where strength was measured by the ability to enhance others rather than dominate them, where love was recognized as the most powerful force for positive change. She's going to grow up believing that cooperation is natural, Lydia said with wonder, that sharing power makes leaders stronger, not weaker. She's going to grow up watching her parents prove it every day, Riley corrected, moving to sit on the arm of Lydia's chair so she could touch their daughter's tiny hand. A soft knock at the nursery door announced Marcus's arrival with the day's priority reports. Your Majesties, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have news from the International Supernatural Council. Lydia and Riley exchanged glances. The ISC was the closest thing to a global governing body for all supernatural communities, and their recognition would represent unprecedented validation of collaborative leadership models. What kind of news? Lydia asked. They want to offer you joint positions as co-directors of leadership innovation, Marcus said with barely contained excitement. The position would involve traveling to supernatural communities worldwide, facilitating the implementation of collaborative governance structures. Riley's eyes widened. They're asking us to help transform leadership globally? Apparently, Marcus continued, the success of the Continental Leadership Council has attracted attention from supernatural communities on every continent. Vampires, fae, witches, everyone is interested in governance models that prioritize cooperation over dominance. Lydia felt excitement and trepidation in equal measure. That would mean extensive travel, complex negotiations with completely different supernatural cultures. It would mean the opportunity to prove that the principles we've discovered transcend species and cultures, Riley said, her voice growing with enthusiasm. Lydia, we could help create a world where collaborative leadership is the norm rather than the exception. What about Arya? Lydia asked. What about our pack? Arya comes with us, Riley said immediately. She'll grow up seeing cooperative leadership in action across dozens of cultures, and our pack is now stable enough, with enough trained collaborative leaders that they can function independently while we expand our impact globally. Marcus nodded. Elder Morrison has volunteered to serve as interim governance coordinator. He says it would be an honor to maintain the systems you've built while you help establish them elsewhere. Lydia looked at Riley, then down at their daughter, feeling the weight of decision that would affect not just their family, but potentially millions of supernatural beings worldwide. What do you think? She asked Riley through their bond connection. I think, Riley replied both aloud and through their mental link, that 18 months ago you told an Omega to get her mark off you. Now that same Omega is offering to help you change the world. Lydia laughed, remembering that first desperate resistance to the bond that had transformed everything. And now? Now I can't imagine changing the world with anyone else, Riley said, leaning down to kiss Lydia softly. Then we do it, Lydia decided. We take our daughter and our bond and our hard-won knowledge, and we help prove that love really can transform everything. As they sat together in the nursery, their bond marks glowing softly in response to their shared determination, Lydia and Riley understood that their love story had become something far greater than either had imagined possible. The Alpha Queen, who had once demanded that an Omega remove her mark, had evolved into half of a partnership that was literally changing how power functioned throughout the supernatural world. And the Omega, whose mark had seemed like an unwanted complication, had become the catalyst for a revolution that would echo through generations. Any regrets? Riley asked, their familiar question now carrying the weight of a year's worth of transformation and a lifetime of possibilities ahead. Only that we can't see far enough into the future to watch our daughter continue what we've started, Lydia replied, looking down at Arya's peaceful face. I think, Riley said, with the quiet confidence that had become her trademark, that's going to be the most beautiful part of all. Watching her grow up in a world where collaborative leadership is so normal that she'll probably find even better ways to make it work. As their daughter slept peacefully in Lydia's arms, and the reports from 43 territories documented the spread of their leadership revolution, both women understood that their bond had become more than a love story. It had become proof that the courage to be vulnerable with the right person could literally reshape the world, one territory, one pack, one heart at a time. The Omega's mark had indeed changed the Alpha Queen, but together they had changed everything else too. The end.